Okay, next paradigm. Let's go and start looking at structured text now in Automation Builder. So right here, I've got an empty application created, and the only program in there is our program file that we start with, so that would be our main program. I'm going to go ahead and maximize this up, and I am not going to spend a whole lot of time showing you this just because it's really exactly like what you've seen before. The only difference is now you're going to get to do a lot more hands-on, and you're going to actually get to, see it work. That's always a plus. So let's come in here, and for some reason, whenever you open this editor, it starts you off with a semicolon on a line. I'm not sure why that semicolon starts off there. Maybe it's necessary, maybe it's not, but at any rate, it's there, so just don't make the mistake of when it's there, you all of a sudden start typing a command here after it, because that's not going to work. So what can we do in here? Well, we already know that we can use most of the functions that we've got in other places in here. We just have to invoke them differently and spell out all of their properties and things like that. So let's go ahead and start by creating a timer. So whenever we did that in 5000, if you remember, we had to do like TON parenthesis, and then we could put in a parameter or two on the inside. Well, in here it's actually a little bit more straightforward, but that more straightforward comes at the cost of we have less help. So let's imagine I want to go ahead and create a timer. I'm going to start by creating a name for it, and I'm just going to call it timer1. And then I'm going to semicolon and hit enter. And as soon as I do, my declare variable window pops up, and I'm going to declare it of the type TON and hit OK. So now I've actually defined a variable, and I didn't have to do it that way. I could have gone right up here to my variable space, and I could have created a variable up there also if I wanted to. But let's go ahead and get rid of that, because let's see, how do I get rid of those? Oh, that's strange. It doesn't seem to want to let me delete anything up there. Well, let's just pretend that that didn't happen, and okay, I guess that's just a graphical anomaly because they're not really there once I pull that thing down. So anyway, back to the lesson. I've got this timer1 and I've already created a variable for it. Well, I'm going to go in above here, because remember, whenever I invoke it just like this, what I'm actually doing is exchanging data with the function block. So if I only ran this thing one time and I put below here, I went and I put, my preset and I energized it and all of that. By the time I get to the end of the scan, we're just talking about if I scan this, program one time, by the time I get to the end, the timer has not changed at all, because I've set all these parameters below it, but I haven't actually invoked the timer. So for that reason, I always define everything above the actual invocation, because I want this to refresh once all of the data is already set. And you can invoke it multiple times. So I could set a parameter, invoke the timer, set another parameter, invoke the timer, and so on and so forth. So if you're working with the timer, the same timer in multiple places, it's not a sin if you want to go and invoke it after every single time you mention the timer. But anyway, let's go ahead and set this up. So I'm going to start typing TI, and I can control enter to get my autocomplete. And once I've got that, all I have to do is hit dot. And once I hit dot, there we go. I've got my parameters. I've got my elapsed time here. There I've got my input. I've got this m, which says it's an internal variable. So I'm not even sure what that m does, but I know it's something that we don't need to use, so let's not worry about it. There's our preset time. We know we're going to need that. There's our Q. And Q is going to tell us that this thing is done. Start time is another internal variable, so for our intents and purposes, we're just going to act like that doesn't even exist. For now, I'm going to define my pre-time by saying :enter and then giving it a time value. Let's go ahead and give it a 20 second. Why not? We'll be generous this time. So T pound 20s semicolon. And just like that, I've set the preset of this timer. And then let's say we'll energize this timer depending on the status of a bool. So let's go ahead and create a bool, and I'll call that test bool, and I'll just go ahead and invoke it right now. So that's going to be of type bool, that's fine. And I'm not really going to do anything with that test bool, but I will go ahead and energize my timer. So if test bool, and I'll autocomplete that, then, and I will say timer1 dot, and I'll go ahead and give it its input, colon equals 1 semicolon, and then I'll else, and then we'll say timer1 dot in colon equals 0. So that looks about perfect. And let's go ahead and end this if. Got it. And we will go ahead and space everything out and indent it, just because I like for everything to look good and be a little bit more readable. So just like that, I've defined a timer, and I'm refreshing that timer by invoking its name at the end of everything. And if my test bool happens to be true, then I'm going to energize my timer. Otherwise, I'm going to de-energize my timer. So let's throw this down and give it a run and see how it works, and make sure that we're on cue with this thing. So we're going to put ourselves into simulation mode. We're going to log in. Everything looks good. So let's go ahead and run. And when we start running, we see that nothing is happening. That's exactly what we want to be happening until I energize this test bool. So Control 7 to send the data in, and as soon as I do, the timer goes true. Perfect. That's exactly what we wanted to see. And if we come up here, we can actually see the timer counting. Over here to the right, this viewer is only showing me the variables that I'm actually calling out in my program. But up here, if I have a function block called in like a timer, I can actually get in there and I can see all of the internals and everything else. So that's very cool. But there we go. We see our timer elapsed, and then our timer is timed out closed, and I can toggle that test val back and forth. So now it's false, now it's true again, the timer starts up, and same thing, I can kill it in the middle and it de-energizes and automatically resets. So now that I've got that, let's go ahead and add one more piece to this. Let's go ahead and put a while loop in here, a do while loop. So I'm going to start typing that out. I'm going to type while, and then I need an expression. And let's go ahead and create something called a count. And we'll say while that's less than 100. Then we'll define that as an int, so I'll just type out dint and hit OK. So while count is less than 100, we're going to do something. And what I'm going to do is we're going to make count, and we're going to set it equal to by colon equals, and it's going to be equals to count plus 1 semicolon. So that means we're just going to add 1 to count every single time. And then after that, we can go ahead and end our while, semicolon out of that. And that's not end plus while, that should be end underscore while. Perfect. And just like that, we should have a while loop. And once I run this program, that count should jump right up to 100 almost instantly. So let's go ahead and test this out. We're going to go online and go into run, and bang, just like that. Our count iterated very, very quickly. We got 100 scans out of this thing. It went right up to 100. And then it'll never enter that while loop again unless something happens to lower my count down or change its value and make it something below 100. So, you know, from looking at this, you already know structured text, because this is almost identical to what we've seen in other environments. And remember me telling you that it's very easy to migrate a program in structured text from one environment to the other. Well, you're seeing exactly why that is, because, I mean, out of this whole thing, you know, there's next to nothing that we would really have to change if we had this program written in here and wanted to take it to 5,000. So very, very convenient for transferring your programs and migrating them from environment to environment. But obviously when it comes to looking at this and trying to figure out what it does and what's happening, you really have to kind of dig in and, figure things out. One thing that can help is obviously if instead of putting everything inside of one file, if you create several different programs, you could have one for your alarms, just like we've done in the past, one for I/O and separate everything out. Well, then your program would be a lot easier to follow. So there are ways to write structured text programs which are not complete nightmares to dig through, but any way you look at it, it is still text. It isn't graphical. It doesn't show relationships. It doesn't show process flow. It is, it's not easy on the eyes. It's not easy for a person who doesn't know the program to get in, look at, and just automatically know what it is. So that's the trade-off. But at this point, you really know what's going on in structured text. If you jump into the help menu knowing what functions are out there, if you needed to define a rising trigger or a scale operation, you could do it. You could hack your way through that. And now we'll go ahead and set up that next project and give you a chance to get in here and actually work with this a little bit and create something meaningful in structured text that we can watch work. So come back in the next section and I'll have something dreamed up, interesting and creative for you to work on by then. Cheers.